folks, with excuse me. Hi, folks, with Tassless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this stream as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the Polish referendum, and I guess referenda, the plural of referendum, referenda in general across the Western world, and its relationship to democracy and the relationship to the globalist ideology. Now, ideological government cannot and will not tolerate democracy, the people deciding. Ideology must be imposed, and it must be uniformly imposed. And if you don't go along with the ideology, then you are an enemy of that ideology, and you must be crushed and taken out of circulation, which is what we're seeing today, whether it be on social media or debanking or whatever it might be. So, but in this instance, I want to sort of concentrate particularly on the Polish referendum. The Polish government is being, and Poland, for those who maybe aren't into geography, is in northeastern Europe, and it has a long coastline on the Baltic Sea. They're being heavied by the EU dictatorship, the European Union dictatorship, which has been completely taken over by the globalist cabal, and they're being told they must take a certain quota of black and brown third world peasants as migrants, be they legal or not or anything. They'll just be given a quota allocation, and that's it. You're taking them. No questions asked, just do what the fuck you're told. Now, that's hardly a democratic way of doing things. The EU argues, well, we give Poland money to help them equalise because they're a former communist, East European communist country, to help Poland equalise its economy with the more advanced parts of Western Europe. So because we give you this money and you take this money, then you have to do what we say in other areas, such as taking illegal black and brown third world peasants as migrants. And the Poles say, well, no, we don't have to do that. The EU then, I'm simplifying this a bit, but the EU then threatens to say, all right, then, well, if you don't do what we say, we're not going to give you the money. And so for every day you don't do what we say, we'll deduct from the money we give you, we'll deduct a certain amount, so that you end up getting less money at the end of the day. So it's effectively a fine in sort of other words. But the Polish government's quite unmoved by this. They say, well, we represent the people of Poland, and they vote for us, and we represent them, and so we're duty bound in a democratic state, at least. We're duty bound to do what our citizens want and what our citizens vote for. And this is the EU is absolutely outraged by this, because again, they're imposing an ideological system. An ideology cannot and will not tolerate democracy. The people aren't allowed to choose. Now, there's also a sort of a snobbish, if you like, and condescending element to this, that anybody who does not have a gender studies degree, or who is not a trans, lesbian, black, whatever, only those people should be allowed to vote. Everyone else should not be allowed to vote. So straight white Christian males, for example, who only have a high school education, so they shouldn't be allowed to vote. They're not educated enough. Educated people have degrees in lesbian dance theory. That's how you know that they're educated. And only those people that have been radicalized through the college system should be allowed to vote. People who have not been radicalized should not be allowed to vote. And that's ideology sort of in practice there, and something that has gone on for as long as sort of ideological government has been imposed. And I guess ideological government, sort of as we understand it, at least in modern terms, didn't only began in 1917 in what became the Soviet Union with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So, that was the beginning of ideological government that spread to other areas, mostly at the point of a gun, by the way. I think Chile and South America may be the only one that I can think of where it was where a Marxist government was democratically elected. You could question the practices, like there was a shitload of Marxist communist agitators running around stirring up the peasants and so on, but nonetheless, that was as close to a democratic election. In pretty much every other instance I can think of, communism or ideological government was imposed at the point of a gun. The ideology of the Nazis in Germany was relatively tame because they still allowed the rule of law and due legal process. They denied it, of course, to certain minorities, to Jews and gypsies, homosexuals, for example. They still allowed Christian religion. You could still go to church if you wanted. Businesses could still hire who they wanted to. They may get heavy to hire certain people here and there, but generally, if they wanted to hire, the best engineers, that they could do that. And so there was a lot of what we would call the free market still remained. Not that there wasn't sort of arrangement with government, but if you look at ideological government, where you're all required to absolutely think in a certain way, and you're forced to do it, regardless of the merits of what you're being forced to do, then the Nazis weren't like that. They genuinely tried to take the people with them and convince them, look, this is better than what it was before, or better than the alternative and that thing. They genuinely tried to do that, and in standard living terms, they delivered quite successfully. But not that it wasn't ideological, it was, but not to that same extent. There was still various free Germans could still move around in Germany, those sorts of things. Whereas in these ideological government places, if you wanted to go to the next village, you needed a political fucking commissar to sign it off, and so on. But coming back to the ideology, or the imposed ideology, the Polish people have a view or the Polish government rather has a view that the Polish people have a right to decide. So they're going to have a referendum. I think it's in October this year. It's soon anyway, and they're also going to include other questions on the referendum, such as privatizing energy assets and things like that, because they're again being heavied by the EU to meet climate targets. Now, the Polish government has done a costing, and they say it's going to cost hundreds of billions of euros for Poland to meet these green targets, and they're saying, well, why should we put the Polish people through such pain and suffering, higher energy bills, less reliable energy? Why should we do that for some sort of notional climate target that's determined ideologically rather than in any known reality? And that's a good question. So they've put that to the people as well. Now, the EU is hit back saying, no, you can't get the people to. You can't ask the people. You just have to do what we say, without a vote, without the people having a voice. And anyway, the people that would vote against it, the non-radicals, the lesbian, gay, lesbian, trans radicals, they'll vote for what the EU wants, but the other people, the straight white male Christians and so on, they won't. So really, straight white male Christians shouldn't be allowed to vote. Their voice shouldn't count. Only the voice of the black lesbians are allowed to count. So this is again an ideological concept. If provided people are radical enough, we'll let them vote, because they'll vote the way we want them to. But if they're not, if they haven't been radicalized, they shouldn't be allowed to vote, which is what we see in the West today. In effect, look at the way they treat Trump voters. They say, they're a bunch of people that didn't get radicalized through the gender studies courses in university, so they shouldn't be allowed to vote. Their vote doesn't count. They're all Nazis, and that attitude. And we see this in the EU. They're very much that. Now, Poland's got a bit of history. Poland used to be quite in a combination of the Kingdom of Poland, Lithuania, and various other iterations. Poland was quite a big player in that northeastern Europe space, but since the late 1700s, they haven't really existed as a nation at all till 1919, and Poland has been partitioned between the major powers that surrounded it, the Germany, Russia, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So So Poland didn't exist. The Polish language existed, Warsaw was still there, and all that sort of stuff. But as a nation state, they didn't exist. They had a brief sort of respite when Napoleon Bonaparte was sort of the head honch in Europe, and he created what was called the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, which was kind of, Warsaw and a cut down or small Poland, if you will. But other than that, Poland didn't really exist for well over 100 years. And when it became a nation state in 1919, it went to war almost immediately with with Russia. So, because Poland has been a nation, was once quite a great nation, but since it's been really and was, by the way, a big player in turning back the Islamic hordes, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turkish Islamic armies got as far as Vienna in Austria. That's sort of how far they got. They ruled over most of the Balkans and Greece and Hungary, and you can still see today in Hungary people of very clear and obvious Turkish descent. So anyway, the Poland played a big role in turning back those Islamic hordes at the time. Now, the Polish people are quite sensitive to this being partitioned and being cut in pieces and handed around to the great powers. So when an EU led by radicalized, globalized German goons tries to impose things on Poland, so you will do this, you will take X million brown and black peasants from the third world, you will do this regarding climate change and so on, with threats and no attempt at democracy. Well, what do the Polish people want? Would you like to have a referendum? No, you will do this. You will do this. And that's the language that they use. And it's quite, in my view, quite brutish. And the Poles, understandably, are saying, hey, hold on a minute. Do you mind if we ask our own citizens? No, says the EU. You're not allowed to ask your citizens. You just got to do what the fuck we tell you to do. Anyway, Poland is having none of that and saying we're going to have a referendum. But this illustrates the globalist utter contempt for democracy and for the voice of the people. They'll have sham democracies where they control all the major candidates, or they'll have sham, like the way they're harassing Donald Trump, trying to prevent him from running for office of president. These sorts of, they'll do that, but they've got a real aversion to letting the people have a voice, or letting the people vote, or letting the people decide. So we can say that as far as the globalists are concerned, democracy has no place in their world vision. If they can completely control it, then they will. But they'll let pretend democracy exist. But outside of that, there's no chance of it. Even a very popular politician in Australia that was opposing globalisation, they ruthlessly pursued this politician, even on very technical bullshit charges. Ended up putting them in fucking prison. That's the price you pay for opposing globalisation in a democracy. The people must not be allowed to decide. And that's the view. And I think looking at democracy generally, there are, as I've mentioned now many times, I think democracy is not perfect, but I'd rather the people decided, for all the faults that has, than have an ideological bunch of goons, fanatical goons, as we have with the globalists now, that are making the decisions for us and imposing it upon us. Effectively at the point of the gun. So I think the Polish thing needs consideration. This is actually a classic fault line: democracy versus ideological imposition here. And I'm glad the globalists, I'm glad the Poles are standing up to the globalists here and saying, no, this is a decision by our people, and will abide by it. And I sincerely hope they reject the climate change and the mass migration, and I hope this referenda idea spreads. If the globalists had gone about, if I was sitting there at the globalist table and And I'm not an ideological fanatic, so I would never be in that position. But let's suppose, then I would sort of think, okay, well, it's better to try and win the polls over. I'd rather they did a referendum and voted and did these things, and I'd rather that happened, and I'd rather that we were able to get people to voluntarily join the mission we have, and whether that's climate change or whether it's mass migration or anything, I'd rather people voluntarily, but to impose it upon them or by deceit or by threat or by whatever, then that's going to build up a level of resentment that you never really overcome. Now, globalist sort of fanatics I've spoken to are saying, well, it's really the older people who don't like it. So within another 20 years, all those older people will be dead or gone, or drooling in a nursing home or something like that. And all the young people who we've radicalized through the education system will be the ones who will approve of all this mass migration, will approve of the incineration of their own societies and their own cultures. And I'm not so sure about that, but I do see their point. They've got a better likelihood of getting the brainwashed and the radicalized to go along with it than they have the independent thinking individuals. So let's see where that goes. But I hope the Polish referendum, I'm pretty sure it will. I think if you held a referendum in any country that's being subject to mass migration, I think anywhere the referendum would say, no, we don't want any more migration. And by the way, we want a lot of the people here sent back to their countries of origin. I think that would happen almost universally. And the globalists know it, which is why they're so terrified of the vote, which is why they're so terrified of Donald Trump. They know he'll win. They know he's got the popular support to win. And that's why they're terrified, which again comes back to when you're imposing ideology, you cannot also have democracy. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.